Hello everyone, I'm Johnny Chang from the world of waterfalls, and in this video I'm going to show you how to do all the bridge to nowhere waterfalls, of which the one behind me is one of them, and I'll show you how to do it in one long day. Everyone knows about the Bridge to Nowhere hike in Southern California, which is formerly known as the East Fork of the San Gabriel River Trail. But most of these hikers are not aware that you can extend this hike to include waterfalls. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to access the Bridge to Nowhere waterfalls, how to prepare for this hike, and the best strategy for tackling the challenge of doing it all in one day. Now, I've chased waterfalls going on 3 decades, and I'm sharing what I know through videos like these so that you can know what to expect when you choose to partake in such rewarding adventures. To get more videos like this and to chase waterfalls safely and responsibly, please subscribe by hitting the icon below. There are 3 main waterfalls near the Bridge to Nowhere that I'm targeting in this one-day challenge. They are the Allison Gulch Falls, the East Fork of the San Gabriel River Cascades by the Bridge to Nowhere itself, and the Devil's Gulch Falls. Now, I've mentioned these main waterfalls of the Bridge to Nowhere in this particular order, and it will become obvious why as you go through this video. This challenge involves 3 adventures in one. You're looking at a hike of at least 16 miles that involves scrambling, lots of river crossings, and some narrow terrain with drop-off exposure. So you will need to plan on being out from dawn till dusk between the start of May to the end of September. As far as preparing for this hike, even if you don't end up doing the whole thing in a day, you're going to need the following things. You're going to want proper shoes and socks. Now, I use the Ultra Lone Peak 5 trail runners because they have decent grip and support, and they quickly let out water. Now, I also recommend using neoprene socks or wool socks, but the main function of these is to keep the feet warm, not dry, and also to prevent chafing, which would cause cuts and blisters and that kind of thing. And I wouldn't recommend using waterproof socks because they're pretty useless if the water goes above the sock and then the water stays in the sock. I also recommend trekking poles. Now, I use the Black Diamond Distance FLZ or the Alpine FLZ, and I use trekking poles like these because they're compact. Trekking poles in general, they're good for balance, and they're lightweight and easy to set up. Now, you're also going to want lots of water on this excursion, and I would recommend bringing at least 160 ounces of water, so that's basically 4 40-ounce bottles. Now, I recognize that can get pretty heavy, so you might want to bring a water filter, like a pump or something like that, such as the MSR MiniWorks EX filter, along with a collapsible bucket. So those 2 things would act to minimize the amount of water weight you'd be carrying on your pack. You'd also want a headlamp just in case you're still out in the dark, and the headlamp provides you illumination hands-free because you're going to want all your hands available. Some first aid just in case you get pricked, cut, scraped, or you manage to twist something, and the first aid kit's got some tape. Also some quick drying layers of hiking clothing, especially things like a light jacket, an outer layer or whatever, so because it gets chilly in the morning and also back in the evening, and then as it gets hot throughout the day, you can layer off. You can take them off as you go. You also want high energy food because it's going to be a long day, so high energy dry foods that are lightweight and compact should hold you over. And then you want a GPS with a map. Now, I use Gaia GPS with premium layers because they have lots of detail, and they have surveyed trail markings, created by people actually working in the field. And I can download the maps and use them offline without cell service because there is none in that hike. Now, you can also use all trails, but you're relying, with the trails on those, you're relying on other people's inputs and tracks, and many of which can be misleading. Now, regardless of what you use, the most important thing is to be able to tell where you are on the map and cross-check what you see on the map against the physical landmarks that you observe in the field. Now that you know how to prepare for this hike, let's get into the details of how to access the waterfalls and how to be successful with this challenge. In order to have enough time to do all the waterfalls in one day, you need to be efficient and quick, especially in the initial part of the on-trail hike between the East Fork Trailhead and the mouth of Allison Gulch. Now, you'll want to be at the East Fork Trailhead by 7 a.m., definitely no later than 7:30, just to, and you also want to make sure that you have an adventure day pass, for your parked car, because yes, the parking is enforced here. Now, adventure passes are generally sold at nearby ranger stations and local outfitter shops. I think there's one in Camp Williams on the way there. But they're also sold at select liquor stores, gas stations, and even big box retailers like Big Five, and as well as REI, which is generally my preferred gear shop of choice. Now, because the trailhead is on National Forest land, the America the Beautiful Pass, formerly known as the National Parks Pass, also work here. The initial part of the hike is about a half mile along a wide, unpaved road leading to Heaton Flat. Now, beyond Heaton Flat, the trail starts to get more rugged as it follows along the east bank of the San Gabriel River. At around 4/10 of a mile past Heaton Flat, we reach the first, what I'm calling interlude, with the San Gabriel River, where we might have to get wet, but we don't have to cross the river. The main thing to do here is just to keep to the right of the river and pick up the trail past this, watery, depending on whether it's, high flow or low flow. But yeah, just past this interlude on the right side, you'll pick up the trail again. Now, a key moment in the first mile or so of the hike is the first legitimate river crossing, which is roughly 2/10 of a mile after the first interlude, or about 1.1 miles from the trailhead. So here you'll want to cross the river and then keep to the left to take a trail that climbs up to a ledge and follows that ledge trail for a ways. Now, in the past, we've been confused here, and we've stayed down by the river. And if you do that, it degenerates into a few more river crossings and, hunting for faint trails, most of which I would imagine are false, but they're caused by other people who have been similarly as confused as we were. But either way, regardless of which way you go, you're going to come to a trio of graffiti-laced walls, which for simplicity we'll just call the quote-unquote graffiti wall. And it's here that you'll want to pick up the trail above the east side or the right side of the river. And while you're up there, you might even notice a ruin. By the way, you'll have to get used to graffiti and litter on this hike, as it's pretty much all over the place. I'd imagine this is a consequence of places that get popular, and so inevitably you do get a few bad apples in the basket, I guess, with people that lack wilderness ethics, especially since it's not being really taught, practiced, and ingrained in us, in our youth. And there's always going to be people who refuse to respect the land and other people. So yeah, I guess basically people who just don't have that sense of responsibility and kind of behave like jerks to nature and other people. Now, beyond the graffiti wall, you then go through about 2 miles of dry hiking through a combination of yucca or yucaipa patches as well as some rockfall traverses. Now, at about 1.5 miles from the ruins, or about 2.6 miles from the trailhead, according to my logs, you'll reach a bridge over Laurel Canyon, followed by a sign saying that you're entering the Sheep Mountain Wilderness. Now, it's another 0.4 of a mile or 3 miles from the trailhead, where we'd reach the next crossing of the San Gabriel River. And along the way, you'll see Swan Rock, which is basically a pattern on the cliff that eerily looks like a swan. And this is a key landmark indicating that you are near Allison Gulch. So, when you get to the river crossing after the long dry interlude, you'll want to cross the river twice, or at least try to veer to the right where you can, and aim for the dam ruins where a side stream joins the San Gabriel River. Now, that side stream indeed comes from the Allison Gulch, and shortly after crossing that side stream, we pick up a trail that deviates from the East Fork Trail and goes right into Allison Gulch. Now, just to check on your progress, you'll definitely want to be here no later than 9 a.m. Now, I was there by 8:30 a.m., but the reason why I'm telling you this is because Allison Gulch is the first and the most difficult of the waterfalls and the detours away from the Bridge to Nowhere. Barely 15 minutes into Allison Gulch or so, the trail is going to degenerate and it will eventually disappear. And at this point, you're pretty much doing trailless scrambling. Now, when I say this detour is difficult, it's primarily because you now have to rely on your senses and your ability to observe and make choices about the best routes to take, as well as the best ways to avoid obstacles that you will inevitably come across. So indeed, it's pretty much a choose-your-own-adventure at this point. At around 40 minutes into the Allison Gulch, pay attention and look for a relic, for example, like this mining cart, which kind of harkens back to the days when, believe it or not, this area was actively explored for mining purposes. And there is indeed a mine further up, higher up above the gulch, called the Allison Mine, which was in operation between the start of World War I and the end of World War II. But in any case, progress within Allison Gulch is still going beyond this. And I guess you take your victories where you can, or things that seem out of the ordinary. And this includes this litter patch, as well as some, which is fronting this chaotic deadfall where I had to find a way to get around that deadfall without bushwhacking right through it. Now, in addition, the stream does go in and out of stretches of being dry. And that's largely because, depending on the terrain that you are in, some of it is more porous and more loose, and therefore the water tends to hide underground. But then in the rockier parts or the more narrow parts of the canyon, then you'll see the stream reemerge above the water. And usually in those parts, it can be a little trickier and more slippery to proceed. Now, around 40 minutes beyond that mining relic, that mining cart, I guess that's what I'll call the first relic, you may notice another mining relic that kind of looks like a spoke of some kind of machine or whatever. And it was also here that I noticed a ribbon tied to a tree that actually leads up out of the Allison Gulch, and I believe that is the Allison Mine Trail. And this is, around an hour and a half so from entering Allison Gulch in the first place. So we'll stay in the Gulch and basically continue our choose-your-own-adventure, bouldering, rock scrambling, deadfall avoiding, bushwhacking, that kind of thing. So here we are at the Allison Gulch Falls. As you can tell, It's a pretty tall waterfall. Now it's not easy, I gotta warn you, it's not easy to get to this this waterfall. Pretty much follow the Allison Gulch, up the gulch, following the stream, all the way up to this dead end at this big waterfall. To an idea of what it took to get all the way here. Basically, it took me about 2 hours of a very slow stream scramble, and really there's no trail. I got to this waterfall, I got what, probably close to a 7:30 start with the hike, maybe a little earlier than that. I got here about 10:45. It's as you can see, I'm all alone in this spot because it takes a lot of effort to get here. I'm gonna savor this experience, and then then I have to do the bouldering and the rough scrambling and all that stuff, all that good stuff, back to the East Fork Trail. So once I had my fill of the Allison Gulch Falls, it was time to scramble back the way I came, and of course that involves more rough scrambling, where I have to be careful about where I place my feet, because you definitely do not want to be injured in a place as rugged as the Allison Gulch. So I made it back to the confluence of Allison Gulch and the East Fork of the San Gabriel River, and you might be able to see over there, right over there, is Swan Rock. Now it might be a bit hard to tell in this footage because there's not a whole lot of contrast. The sun is beating down on it. So it's almost about 1 o'clock. After getting to Allison Gulch and back to this point, if you wanted to call it a day and end the challenge, I don't blame you. At this point, it's a decision point, right? If whether to quit while you're ahead, I guess, and live to fight another day for the Bridge to Nowhere and the Devil's Gulch Falls, or you still got a half day left, and push forward to hit the other two and complete the challenge to hit all the Bridge to Nowhere waterfalls in one long day. However, if you do want to proceed and hit the rest of the Bridge to Nowhere waterfalls, the next phase is back on the trail, on the East Fork Trail, and compared to Allison Gulch, it's a piece of cake to at least get all the way to the Bridge to Nowhere and beyond it to the Cascades on the San Gabriel River itself. It might be a good place to have a late lunch or a picnic or something like that. Now the dry hiking continues as it goes past a Bigfoot sign, and then past a landslide article where we were definitely glad we brought trekking poles and shoes with decent grip. So we just crossed this landslide. This landslide is the very reason why you can't build a road here. And when we were here about a month or two ago, it was much narrower than it is now. But now it's not too bad. The East Fork Trail then descends into a bouldery wash area where you don't want to prematurely go up to the Bridge to Nowhere road at this point, even though you may see a line cutting across the cliffs to your right. And you're going to see why you don't want to do this very shortly. So the East Fork Trail will eventually get to another narrow section once you traverse this wash with more boulders and yucca patches, and you're going to have to get to a point where you cross the river again. And from here, you'll want to cross the river and then follow the west bank until you have to cross back over the river. And there may be arrows helping to point the way, but even if you miss the arrows, you'll find that the water obstacles are going to get trickier, and so maybe that will be enough of a hint for you to compel you to go back towards the east side of the San Gabriel River. So once we're back across to the east bank of the San Gabriel River, you'll now see that you'll be in another wash area full of boulders and yucca patches, but it's in this section, this wide open section, that you'll see where the Bridge to Nowhere road up on the cliffs, it kind of rounds the corner and then it suddenly disappears as if it eroded off or was covered by landslides or whatnot. But we witnessed one person get stuck, or at least encounter, I guess, took that road too early, got to that dead end, and I guess did a really dicey scramble down the cliff, which I'll be happy to note I think he did it successfully. But I guess it wasn't palatable to backtrack and go back the safe way. But in any case, this is the main reason why it wasn't a good idea to get onto the road in the previous Yucca Patch and wash. Anyhow, now that we're in this different wash, you'll notice up ahead that the trail will gravitate back towards the Bridge to Nowhere road, thankfully beyond that eroded off part. and this is where you would want to follow the trail that descends up to the Bridge to Nowhere road. So once we're on that Bridge to Nowhere road, we'd want to follow it for the remaining 1.2 miles or so, all the way to the Bridge to Nowhere. Now, even though from the ground the road kind of looks obvious, I mean, there's like an obvious line that sort of ascends in sort of a gentle slope on the way further upstream. When you're actually up there, you will notice that it's not really the wide road that we would have expected. If anything, it's just a little overgrown on the way, and you might get stabbed by a few more Yucaipa along the way. But the bottom line is just keep following this road, and it will eventually get to another sort of narrow area where the trail will traverse another landslide obstacle, and then go through an area that looked like it was blasted to make way for the road. But the bottom line is you'll eventually encounter some Bridge to Nowhere signs. And then not much further, there'll be even more Bridge to Nowhere signs, as well as some containers, these shipping containers, I guess, that have a lot of security cameras on them, because this area is private property, and I would imagine it has the owners or whoever is entrusted with this part of the land. They're the ones that run the bungee jumping excursions, typically on the weekends. Now, a lot of people are content to just be at the Bridge to Nowhere and enjoy the views, but we noticed from the bridge that there are actually more Cascades. So here we are at the Bridge of Nowhere. This is, believe it or not, this is actually my first time here. It seems like everybody from out of town knows about this place. So yeah, it's crazy, right? All the waterfalls I've been to, and this is my first time being at the Bridge to Nowhere. And really, I guess for someone like myself, there's no excuse, right? Because if you look down at the San Gabriel River, you will actually see there are legitimate Cascades. It means they're year-round because they're on the San Gabriel River. And those pools down there, this trail will take you down to those pools. I guarantee you, when it's hotter, people are going to be using those as swimming holes. So we went past the Bridge to Nowhere and followed a narrow, eroded trail that eventually leads down to the banks of the San Gabriel River, pretty much adjacent to the series of Cascades that were not only worth checking out, taking pictures of, but I would imagine as it gets hotter here in the late spring and the summer, a lot of people would probably want to take a dip there, especially when the water levels get lower and there's a little less current. Now, this is also a great place to have a lunch or a picnic as well. And so, once we had our fill of, this pretty cool spot to, enjoy the Cascades, enjoy the Bridge to Nowhere, just linger around and just enjoy the scenic ambiance of the area. If it's still 4 p.m. by the time you're ready to leave this place, then you can consider going on to the Devil's Gulch. So on the way out of the Bridge to Nowhere, you'll want to backtrack along the narrow eroded trail back up to the Bridge to Nowhere, and then go back across, and then, go across the Bridge to Nowhere to leave the Bridge to Nowhere, and then backtrack on the East Fork Trail. Now you want to be on the lookout for the Bridge to Nowhere signs. I think the very first one you would have encountered, especially the very first one you would have encountered on the way in, which means this would be the last one on the way out. And the reason why you want to pay attention is because near this sign, there is an unsigned spur use trail that descends from the East Fork Trail and goes down to the East Fork of the San Gabriel River. Now, if you don't have confidence in finding this spur trail or whatnot, it might be tempting to try to go directly downstream, under the bridge and downstream from the Bridge to Nowhere to the Devil's Gulch. But, there's a lot of private property signs. It's strictly prohibited to do this. And I would imagine it's largely because the landowners, do not want liability on their hands on their property. And so, you can't do that. You got to basically, find this use trail to get down there. And, even if you miss it, it is possible to go back down, off the road and back into the wash, where you climbed up to the road. There is a use trail, a deviation that allows you to follow the river and wade upstream along the river for a bit before reaching the mouth of the Devil's Gulch. Now, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to use this use trail, and which in essence kind of makes this more or less a loop hike. And you're going to follow the trail downstream, which is surprisingly well-worn and pretty straightforward to follow. So there's a bit of a stretch of dry hiking, along this surprisingly well-used stretch. And you might even notice some historical remnants. For example, we noticed a steel cable, kind of buried into the ground. And of course, because it is apparently been well used, we saw some additional litter and even a Home Depot bucket that was left behind there. But eventually this trail gets to another river crossing, and it's not long after this crossing that you then have to cross the river again, right into the mouth of the Devil's Gulch. At the mouth of the Devil's Gulch, there might be a cascade spilling right there, and that would be a good sign that the Devil's Gulch Falls would be flowing. But in any case, you'll want to scramble about a quarter mile upstream, from this waterfall into the Devil's Gulch. And the way we did it is we went to the left of this waterfall, and then we cut across to the right, where we found it a bit easier to just boulder and scramble on that side as opposed to the left side, which gets a little more wet and more trickier, I guess. But anyways, as we scrambled along, deeper into the Devil's Gulch, we saw, interesting things like a platform adjacent to a seemingly out-of-place chimney. Now, rumor has it that there is, someone that pants for gold there, but in all the times that we've been there, we haven't seen them. But in any case, once this scramble will lead you to the base of the Devil's Gulch Falls. And once you're there, it might be hard to properly view the falls because there are a lot of trees and foliage around, and they kind of prevent the view from being clean or, wide open, I guess, especially if you're trying to take videos and photos here. And so, I actually found that if you're actually here in the winter, you might actually see more of the waterfall because the leaves haven't sprouted yet. But when you come in the spring, the leaves are definitely out, and that might obstruct your view even more. After we're done with the Devil's Gulch, then it's time to scramble back out of the gulch. And instead of backtracking and going back up to the Bridge to Nowhere road where we went down earlier, we instead would go downstream, follow it past this litter patch and, some other interesting infrastructure, I guess, where we then have to cross the river, be on the west side, go through more yucca patches for a bit, and then cross back across the San Gabriel River near some machine relic. And then, once we cross the river back to the east side of the San Gabriel River, there's some more, following use trails through boulders and yucca patches. And then eventually we will rejoin the formal East Fork Trail, and by then you may notice the presence of arrows spray painted on rocks to help guide you, especially around or near the river crossings, as well as other possibly confusing junctions. As long as we leave the Devil's Gulch by no later than, I'd say 6 p.m., then we should be back at the trailhead right when it gets dark, especially if it's late spring and in the summer. I definitely would not try this one-day challenge in the winter or the early spring or the late autumn, because you're not going to have enough daylight to finish. And hiking in the dark, even if it is on trail, can be very dangerous. So you can see that trying to hit all of the major Bridge to Nowhere waterfalls in a single day requires a bit of preparation and good physical as well as mental health. So yeah, it's definitely not easy, but then again, if you've got the time, you can also visit each of these waterfalls in separate excursions. And that would make the experience more enjoyable because you can take your time while also paying more attention to, things like the history, the scenery, and even the odd wildlife sightings in a more relaxed environment. In my mind, it's better to do that than to stress out about injuries, darkness, running out of food and water, and, fighting through fatigue amongst other things, right? Of course, this begs the question, why would you even want to do this challenge in the first place? So, well, first and foremost, if you look at this Bridge to Nowhere map, you'll see that most of the waterfalls are actually pretty far in, at least over, I'd say, 3 miles, maybe even 5 miles from the trailhead. And so that is distance that you have to get back. And so it would take at least, I would say, 9 or 10 miles for each of the individual waterfalls if you were to do them individually, right? Now, if you were to try to, do it all in one shot, then I believe, at least according to my logs, the overall hiking distance would be closer to 16 miles. So you wouldn't be logging in additional miles. In any case, sometimes not everyone has the luxury of, doing all 3 waterfalls on separate occasions. And, especially sometimes you just got to take it where you can. Like, there could be years where we just don't get water. There's no precipitation and the waterfalls wouldn't be flowing. And, especially with the west drying out due to climate change, you just don't know when and what the next thing might, hit your life and prevent you from, living your best life. So the bottom line is you might as well try to, live your life the best you can while you still can. And if it means trying to do it all in one visit, then I don't blame you for thinking that way. But just realize that the flip side to rushing through things is missing out on all the little things. And when taken everything in its totality, these are the things that make life as precious as it is.